And lastly, I just wanted to put Star in conversation with some artists that I've experienced recently. So, like I mentioned, I'm from the Bronx, and I went to Storm King, which is a little bit like upstate New York. And I experienced this artwork, this sculptural artwork at Storm King. And it's called The Sun and the Moon, and it's made by Ugo Rondinone, who's a Swiss-based artist. And what Rondinone sort of talks about the inspiration for this work is that they had lost their partner, their long-term partner, to the AIDS epidemic. And they started to think about like how we as humans are correlated with the energies that exist in the universe, and how we are also here materially on this land, like living a life. And so I kind of wanted to think about how Star's work also thinks about land and the cosmologies that people create in order to survive loss. But there's also like a deep longing for something else, to conjure something else that lives outside of the violence that we experience things to be. And this is the last slide. Two other artists that I also think that Star's work is in conversation with is Ana Mendieta and also Belkis Sayong, both Cuban people. Ana Mendieta was a Cuban visual artist, also performance artist, and this here is a silhouette of her making of like dirt and land. And Becky Sayong was a printmaker who thought with the mysteries of African-Cuban cosmology. And there's actually a curator at the Hammer Museum. Her name is Vanessa Arismendi, who thinks really deeply with Belkis Sayong, and that's how I was introduced to her work. But I wanted to place Star in sort of like this lineage of artists who think about land, nature, cosmologies, and how they can reorient our visions towards the future, but also how we can reorient how we understand ourselves. Because something that Star really made clear, especially in the forward of their book, and in also the back portion, is like they're thinking with all of their ancestors. They're thinking with their Amerindian ancestors. They're thinking with their enslaved African ancestors, and they're also thinking with their white ancestors, the colonizer ancestors. So how do we live with all of this pain and hurt, and what do we make of that? And what could a potential redress within ourselves also emanate out to the world once we blend those visions and histories together? So that's my take on Star's book. Yeah, and I mean, you know, Star, yeah. So Star was an MFA student at UCLA, and we became friends there, and we knew each other from New York, but became closer while living here. So I don't know. I don't know everything about the book, but if y'all have some questions, I could try my best. And yeah.
I don't know if you've talked about already, but can you talk a little bit more about the deck that they also made and how you see the deck in relationship to this other kind of book? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So this deck, oh my God. So what Star has told me about this deck is that this has been years of collecting information of different native plants from everywhere. The Africa, Asia, the West, the Caribbean. And so in thinking with these plants, Star has also written meditations that reflect the energy of that plant. And so it's not just the pulling of a card, you know. I don't know. I have quite a bit of decks. I like it, you know. I like to play. But I think what I find most like gravitating about the deck that Star made is the meditations that they've written. And so how none of them are, well, first of all, that it's related to the land, which is a place that we need to fortify our connection with, because it's where we're all from, and it's what we have to sustain in order to live a future, a livable future. But also that the meditations take on like none of them are negative like they're not, they're taking on the energy of the plant to be able to tell you what can you feel at this moment that is relative to how this plant exists in the world. And I think making our relations as much as we can displace the human in our current life and in our future life is very powerful. So that's one of the things that I really, really enjoy about the deck. It's years and years in the making. The meditations are so powerful, and they just connect us to a world that we don't necessarily always think about. And their writing is very beautiful. Yeah. And they also are like sort of lined in this gold detail, which I think is really important, thinking about how there is such a history of extraction coming from everywhere, you know, the Caribbean, the U.S., all these places. And the extraction was for money, for greed, for ostentatious architecture. So to think about how what we have left is our words, what we have left is our relation, what we have left of the land can also be lined with gold the way we want to, I think is really powerful. Yeah.
I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more. I know you were mentioning a couple of, Mama,
Oh, Mama Tingo, yeah. Yeah.
kind of the hidden narratives of Afro and indigenous collaborations. And I know that within Latinidad, there's like to a certain extent as part of the colonial process, and mestizaje could be being argued to be part of that, and the erasure of Afro and indigenous socialities can be something also said. Do you think there's a connection between all that and nationalism, or like how do you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Absolutely. I mean, Latin American nationalism is rooted in mestizaje, which is the upholding of everything white and the denigration and erasure of everything that's not white. And so to think about, and then also within that, there's material realities of where opportunities are situated and have been situated. And so there are different spheres that happen. Like, there's one sphere that a lot of literature and a lot of people like to say that anti-blackness and anti-nativeness is different in Latin America because there is such a history of mixture. And that's not true. Like, the same powers that segregated, the same colonial and anti-black powers that segregated Black people in the U.S. to a particular life is the same strategies that were used in Latin America. And so I feel like there's this undoing that's happening in the public sphere because also Black people and Native people are migrating, and it's part of like migrating for opportunity and also forced migration. And I think that there's something about being at the seat of empire when you're no longer in it and your descendants are no longer in it, that gives you an ability to speak that is definitely shut down when you're there, because of those how there's so much national fervor around where you're from and how your country is different, particularly from the West, when it's actually not. And then in terms of like Native and like Black socialities and relationships, I think that there's so much to be uncovered. Like, but also like Latin American archives are a mess. I mean, particularly the Dominican Republic's archives are a mess. Like, for like, if you think about Loria Garcia Peña's book, like she literally talks about how she would go into this, you know, library Congress building. It will be so hot, and she'll be flipping through all these papers, and she's like, I actually am finding nothing. And I think that's what critical fabulation intervenes. Like, we may never find, like, what we will find is maybe just ledgers, the 400,000 tons of sugar, the washerwomen. But how do we start to sort of think about what their lives could have been? And even if we can critically fabulate these relations, we can also just build them today. And that today, I think, will give us an opening into the past, which I think is what the deck allows me to do. Like, it allows me to be seated in the present, but also thinking with the past, and how being a survivor and a descendant of various dispossessions, and in relation with people, when I'm like reading by myself or reading with people, can open up conversations. I hope that that's helpful. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I mean, I just became a candidate in spring of this past year, so thank you. And I'm in sociology, so initially, like, my project, I wanted it to be about Black Dominican cultural production and how Black Dominican artists and cultural workers are reimagining, re-envisioning Dominican culture, and also our relationship to the world, especially because there is such a strong narrative of anti-Blackness, and that has material realities of people being dispossessed and displaced and targeted and killed and all those terrible things. But I wasn't able to have the right advisement for that. So I feel like my connection to Star's work falls within that. But my actual, like, dissertation project is around infrastructures and how people survive hostile infrastructures, particularly in New York City. And I actually do think it's related, because I'm finding that the way people survive hostile infrastructures is through writing themselves out of it, through writing other worlds, through talking with their neighbors, through mutual aid, through these small fractal engagements that give life when, like, the city is making it so that you are not alive. So I think that for me, Star's work is an intervention into life as we know it. And especially coming from the Bronx, New York, that the Bronx has a particular history of, like, decrepitness. Everybody always remembers the fires. Nobody ever remembers what came after. And how people, like, they willed themselves out of a place. And also how these fires were coordinated. They were coordinated by the government. They were coordinated by landlords. And there's a body of work that is sort of rising to talk about this coordination. And this, I think Kianga Yamada Taylor calls it, like, predatory inclusion in her book on, like, housing, and how Black women were, like, literally the housing industry and the federal housing loan was built on Black single women not being able to pay their mortgages. And so I think about that concept, predatory inclusion, quite a lot, especially in my research of hostile infrastructures and how people survive them. Yeah, thank you for that.
What kinds of people are you talking about in the Bronx?
Thank you for that question. I am talking about Black and Latinx femmes of color, and I'm particularly thinking with especially the word femmes, because it's expansive and it doesn't sit with women as a category, as an essential category. It's open, and it's the energy that they embody. And then, focusing on Black and Latinx, because the Bronx is over 90% Black and Latinx, and I think that the people are able to that site, the Bronx, is just so important for us to think about how the world is becoming more multicultural or more racial in this particular way. And when we look at places that are already inhabited by those demographics, like how do they live, and how do they survive like the climate of racial capitalism with each other? Yeah.
What do you think, how do you think technology plays a role within Star's book? I know you mentioned bodies, Amerindigenous and African, Afro-descendant bodies as technology. I never thought about that. That's amazing. How do you think that's related to
Yeah, I mean, we were literally doing 400,000 tons, and y'all saw that photograph. Like, there is no technology there as we know it. It's only people, hands, and cattle. And so when I say like black people and native people as technology, I literally mean as doing the work of for the science to be built. Like, the science would not have existed if we had not done the labor. And even in more contemporary examples, like I recently learned about this, I wish I knew her name, but she was living in Detroit, and they used AI to misrecognize her, and she spent 8 months in jail, I think. And so thinking about how also like literally like the legibility, like the actual skin, like Black and Latinx's, Asian people, like people of color existence are building technologies. And how are these technologies also then being marshaled against people of color in a way to criminalize and make the carceral state more robust than it is now? Because this is also a carceral environment. The fact that, people are relegated to only doing a particular type of work, and then the kind of work that it's doing is so backbreaking, it's so intense, it's so ancestrally elongated from 1492 to 1930, then what, like, I don't know, I'm thinking about questions that I know Star asked around the psyche, and also how like the psyche is also integral to the making of science as we know it. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
I'm wondering if how experiencing this book and the way that Star curated it, this is your own understanding your relationship to a land that you both have ancestral ties to. Like, are there ways that you're interacting with, like the way Star decided to curate the book to fit your thinking about?
Thank you for that question. I feel like this book could be read in so many layers. Like, the first layer is like the visual layer, right? So you have these beautiful images that have been particularly curated and overlaid with their eye for what they wanted the image to actually look like after encountering it in the archive. So that's the first layer in which I read it, where I'm like, oh my God, this is so visually arresting. Like, for example, I mentioned that I had never seen pictures of washerwomen in the Dominican Republic, and being also the descendant of washerwomen, but also having heard of washerwomen in the U.S. And so to just have that physically in a book, I'm like, whoa, this is reconfiguring something I think ancestrally for me, even when the washerwomen have no names. Like, I know the name of one Petronila. And so I think that for me has just been neurally shifting my gaze a lot, and how I understand images to be. I also think there's a history, like, I wish I knew more about like the history of photography. I do know a little bit about how like I've heard a little bit about how like photography as a medium could be devalued by people, especially like Ulises is a photographer, so you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, right? I mean, even the language around photography is often like you take it inherently has a violent connection to it. But I think, and I was kind of follow up on your question when thinking about like the connections you're making, right? And being and now looking at this photo of Usher, right? When for me that so like that for me it was a connection of like, oh wow, okay. And then you hear even like this reimagining resistance of like something like maintaining childhood a little longer. And like what I mean, like, oh no, it's like
Yeah.
but so it connects to that in the sense of like in thinking of images, like I think there's once it exists out in the ether, whatever intent was, it's gonna have reverberations and reverberations, right? And I think an act of resistance is so interesting thinking about how do VR, how do you like Afro-Dominican communities then reimagine their own images in the book of space.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I like my mother is from the campo, still from the campo. I go to the country, the bush, whatever you want to call it. And like I cannot wait to bring this book back to them because I really don't even know if they because also there's a way in which resources don't reach the bush. They really don't. And so what does it mean for me to have this book that has photographs of washerwomen, of Black Dominican women that they're also related to and kin to. So I think in that way, neurally, like it has totally changed how I view my history. I also think that there are a lot of figures in here that I did not know about. And so the naming of like Black feminist figures who are really prominent and getting like the suffrage, like the women's vote in the Dominican Republic is really important. And that's some deep research work, like uncovering these figures that nobody talks about and are not popular, and thinking about how, yeah, feminism has been present regardless of what we know, like or have known up until now. And I think another way that this book is very impactful for me is just like the fabulated letters. I don't think I've mentioned it, but there are several places where like Star pens letters like as if they were Christopher Columbus. And there's another letter that they pen as if they were their grandmother who had visited Niagara Falls for the first time with their with their dad. And so how these interventions open us again to imagining otherwise and creating stories for ourselves and to get closer to that thing like that we can't touch. So I just feel like it adds a very multi-dimensional texture to like history as we know it, Caribbean history, Latin American history, Dominican history. And I hope that it's like the beginning of a lot of other artists, artist scholars, artist researchers doing this sort of interventionary work, art interventionary work into their national configurations. I also been thinking about neuroaesthetics a lot, like in terms of like what it means to have beautiful things, you know, like I think back to the Bronx. While it is a place that I find beautiful, I do think that there are places there is again like a hostile infrastructure, like I've mentioned, that's been coordinated by the city and coordinated by government. And so it's like finding beauty in the hostile infrastructure, but I think that there's just images here that are beautiful. And so I've been trying to sort of consume more aesthetically, like they hug me in a very different way. And And what does it mean when you're like I'm 31 now, so I moved out of New York when I was maybe like 25, 23, between 23, 25. And so ever since then, I've been seeing different things where it's like in the U.S. or it's abroad. And for example, this book. And so what does that do to my brain? To see beautiful things, to see myself, to see my history, to see other histories. I think that's really powerful. And it does a kind of work that is kind of like indescribable. And in necessary, I don't know, maybe like a neuroscientist can quantify it if they put some things in my head or whatever. But I think I think that has been another intervention for this book. That it's gorgeous. I like pretty things. I'm also a Libra, so yeah. Yeah. And I wish that Star was here so they could talk about the land more, because I think that they have a very particular intervention around rematriation and land connection that I'm still working on. I don't know a lot about, but I think that the way that they express it and they see us intrinsically tied to the land and projects of land liberation are really, really beautiful and freeing. So, yeah.
You mentioned, what I think it was, what is left of our lives to be surrounded by gold. I just wondered what the significance of gold is.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's abstract. Yeah.
So I feel like at the most present level right now, I've been thinking about gold lately because I've been seeing a lot of people with like gold earrings, gold necklaces, and I'm like, ooh, I want that. And the reason I want it is because it's beautiful and it glistens, and how so often like adornment is something that isn't attributed to bodies of color and black bodies and specifically. So I think to me it gives like a value, another added value that it's not always attributed. I also think that the gold juxtaposed with the history inside, like I find this to be a really soft book, even though it's about violence. Like, don't get it twisted. Like, this book is about serious violence, like corporal violence, archival violence, like mental violence. And it's still so soft. And I feel like the lined gold pages, the gold in the front, the gold in the back, the position in which, the photographs were placed. It just gives it a softness to me that otherwise it would be too hard to swallow. And it's like, why are we consistently swallowing these difficult things of black and native death? Like, I'm tired of that. I know that it happens. I know that it exists. I'm living, I'm living it. But I think that there's a way that we can think about how to creatively make it softer so that people are not always triggered. And I think that the gold lining in this book and in the gold lining that they chose for the cards as well does that. So.
I thought it was really cool, the first picture you took to show with the Kerouac.
That one?
No, sorry, I guess it was the third
This one?
But the gold being
Oh, yes.
out of the land and something that they use as resistance. So I didn't know that, and I think like that has made me think about gold very differently also. So I think it's really cool that they have that as a common like connection between both of these like offerings that they've made into the world.
Yeah, and
Thank you for spotlighting because it's made me think about gold very differently.
and I'm like, this is the gold that they came to get. Now let me put it in your mouth. Like, let me kill you this way. Like, you want it so bad. Like, I'm gonna choke you with it. And so I think there's something so. It's also just like the mouth is a sensuous orifice, And so I don't know. There's something also very sensual about the kind of violence that is being depicted right now. I don't know. And I also love thinking about revenge. And yeah, I mean, how could we not, you know? And I think that, I don't know, like golded lined revenge sounds good to me. Like, you know, like, you know. Yeah. Yes. Oh. Thank y'all for coming. No, Star wasn't here, but I hope y'all got a good, you know, introduction or feeling about what the text and also the ephemera is about. So thank you so much.